we have a problem, we want to fix it, we fix it by doing this. I'm really, really bad at just sitting there and feeling something. Emotions need to be felt to be free. One of the best things we can do for mental endurance is to build proof that something's not true. I spend a lot of time writing down examples of when I felt like that's it and I've kept going. I've always been interested in running an ultramarathon. My whole life I've been fascinated with endurance and human endurance and read some amazing books about human endurance. And it's just always fascinated me that the human body can do something like that. My name is Ben West. I'm a mental health campaigner, and which is a really funny thing to say because it's not something I ever thought I'd do. It's certainly not a job I ever thought I'd have. Really, I sort of fell into this in a pretty unfortunate way. About 7 years ago, when I was growing up, I had no idea what mental health was. I'd never ever heard of mental health or depression or anything like that. No one had ever sat me down and talked about it. No one had talked about it at school until when I was 17. My younger brother Sam was diagnosed with depression. And again, no idea what that was. I just thought, how can you be diagnosed with being sad? Like, I really didn't understand it at all. Very sadly, Sam took his own life and died when he was 15 years old, which for me as a 17-year-old was just the most horrific experience I could possibly imagine going through. And I guess very quickly I realized that I wanted to do something to change, how people felt about mental health so that, the other Sams out there felt a little bit more comfortable. And have been doing this work for 7 years now, focusing on young people, education and health policy, trying to make care and education more accessible for children, young people, and essentially trying to prevent suicide and help people have deeper, better conversations about mental health. And then when they have the conversation, know that there is actually help there, which is often not the case. So it's been a busy 7 years. I can't believe it's been 7 years. It's absolutely flown past. It really feels like Sam died a year ago. And it's been a very, very busy 7 years, but we've done a lot of really cool, interesting and productive work, which, I love making a silver lining, and the fact that we can help other people is a really amazing thing to come out of something that was just horrifically awful.
From that tragic moment 7 years ago, as you say, how did you like get on this journey of campaigning? Because it's kind of, you were a young man when that happened as well. You were, in your late teenage years. So most people don't know what they want to do with their life at that point anyway. How did you get on this trajectory?
Yeah, good question. I did know what I wanted to do in life. At that point, I wanted to go into the armed forces. I wanted to join the army and join the Army Air Corps, and that was my plan. As you can see, I am not in a helicopter, so it's not quite how it worked out. But from my point of view, really, I could sit here and say, what happened, and I went, no, let's do something good about this. But actually, I think it was much more of a practical decision from me. This bad things happened. I was 17. I was about to do my A levels. My life at that point was either grief and trauma or biology revision. Neither of which was very appealing. And so I wanted the third option. And the third option for me was, let's raise some money for charity. Let's go outside. Let's have a bit of fun. Let's get some mates together. Let's have a conversation about this. Let's print off some colourful t-shirts and do a charity campaign and a charity sort of event. And it just gave me that third option of something good to do. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of that is just down to complete luck. The fact that it's really interesting, and I'm not saying this to like toot my own horn or anything, but I've won awards for what I do in the campaigning world. And it's always this really weird moment when I've won an award where I'm like, it's so interesting because the difference between me being on a stage collecting an award for the work I do now and me being addicted to drugs, being in and out of hospitals and mental health units because I reacted in a slightly different way to what I've got. It's the only difference is luck. I was just
Yeah.
very, very lucky that I chose to go on this path. It would have been very, very, very easy for me to have been gone down a very different path and got access to drugs and alcohol and really developed some very bad coping mechanisms. And I understand that actually it's a bit like running, I've always loved running. It was always a relief for me, but I just fell into that by complete chance. I
Yeah.
just went, this is something I enjoy. Oh, and it happens to be healthy. I could have very easily have taken drugs and gone, oh, this makes me feel better, and it's unhealthy. And I always think that I've been very, very fortunate with the people I have around me, and just been very, very fortunate to have gone down this path. And I see how easy it could have been for another path to have sort of unfolded in front of me.
I guess as well, being in the space you're in now and seeing, as you say, that other path that a lot of people do head down because they don't know how to deal with the grief that they may be facing. Does that maybe make you reflect on that other path a little bit more?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And it's because I think it can be very easy once you've got a bit of distance from what's happened. You can sort of start getting onto the sort of treadmill of life, and everything sort of feels normal, and you sort of have to think sometimes what I went through was just horrific. I mean, it was absolutely horrific. It was not just the grief of losing a brother that I was very close with and grew up with, but actually the trauma of losing someone's suicide is, I'm sure, because so many people are affected by this, there'll be at least someone listening that's been in a similar situation. But we don't talk about suicide enough, so we don't talk about actually what it's like enough. And for the people that are there on the scene when that happens, it is extraordinarily traumatizing, not just for me as a family member, but for the police and the paramedics that I'm in touch with now, who some of which have left the emergency services because of that job. So that it was just horrifically painful, and I think I have to remind myself of that sometimes, because that's what I'm still dealing with, and it can feel like sometimes you've sort of crossed that bridge and you're fine, but actually it's always going to be there. And you have to think about your actions and the decisions you're making, and making sure you're doing the healthy decisions, because it can be very, very easy to make those unhealthy decisions. And I always know that other path is there, that dangerous unhealthy path is always there, and I've seen people go down that other path, and I have no, and this is where we're going into a bit of a different conversation here, but this is where I have no blame on those people for making those
Yeah.
decisions, because I see how easy it is to do that. And it is just complete luck that you sort of go down the right path or not. You end up on a stage being celebrated and applauded, or you end up in a mental health unit, trying to take your own life, or addicted to substances. There is very little difference in those situations, and it feels like a weird thing for someone like me to say, but yeah, it just shows the power of those experiences and how just horrific it all was.
And I think for people on the outside probably looking in at you and seeing the amazing things you're doing, which you are, I think sometimes it's easy to forget that you have your own mental health journey as well. Like, people are seeing you on the stage getting the awards, people are seeing you doing these amazing challenges, raising loads of money, which we'll get on to. Do you sometimes have to remind yourself, like when these days come up and these flashpoints come up, like, I'm on my own journey here as well?
You do. There's the great saying is that you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah.
There have definitely been days where I've tried,
Yeah.
and it took me many, many years to work out, how I also look after myself, because I think a lot of my work campaigning, so being very practical about things. My one of my big campaigns is trying to improve teacher training, because in the UK, to become a teacher, you don't have to know anything at all about mental health or child development, which just seems wrong, right?
Yeah.
So for me, like throwing myself into that, and working on the policy and reaching out to MPs and going to Parliament and Downing Street and doing all that stuff, it's a nice thing, and it actually can be sometimes a bit of a distraction, and I
Yeah.
can distract myself a little bit, and you have to sort of go, hang on, Like, am I distracting or am I coping and processing things? And I was very lucky that I met a absolutely brilliant counselor and went through a very, very long period of treatment and some brilliant treatment practices that have just been amazing. But you have to remind yourself about just what it is that started all of this, and make sure you're not just pushing it aside and saying, look how well I'm doing all this stuff, when actually, distraction is, it's very difficult to tell the difference between distraction and dealing with something. There's nothing wrong with distraction. Sometimes we all need that, but
Yeah.
you have to keep track of it.
When those moments do come up, because I know it was the anniversary in January, and we'll get onto that post because something you also posted in that post was coming up in May, which is very exciting. But what are those mechanisms that you do kind of put into play when those moments happen? Maybe when you're in, a downward phase of your mental health journey.
Yeah. So when I was receiving counselling, I remember one session, and my counsellor was like, "So like, how are you doing?" And I went into this whole thing about, "Oh, I'm doing good because I'm doing this, and I'm running, and I'm doing all this stuff." And oh yeah, and she just went, "Whoa,"
Yeah.
and it was really cheesy, but she said, "Ben, we're human beings, not human doings." And I've always been really practical, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are probably the same, where we have a problem, we want to fix it, we fix it by doing this. And I'm really, really bad at just sitting there and feeling something. And it sounds really cheesy, and little me would never have been, saying this on a podcast. But the best thing that we can do, and I've said this so many times, and I've said it when I wrote my book, it was a big feature in that, was emotions need to be felt to be freed. Everyone talks about expressing emotions. Well, that's essentially expressing. It's getting it out. If you
Yeah.
feel sad, the only way to not feel sad anymore is to cry and to actively be sad. If you feel angry, which is the big one in the world we live in, because anger is seen as a really bad emotion. It's not an emotion that's sort of allowed to happen. If you're feeling angry, the only way you're not going to feel angry is by being angry, like just going and expressing that anger in a safe, healthy way. And so that's really what I try and do now is keep a track of how we're feeling. Like, how do I actually feel, and how do I get that emotion out? Like, the way to not feel sad isn't to pretend you're not sad, it's to feel sad, right? And then it processes itself and goes away. So I think it's being quite strict and quite you know being quite strict with yourself to go, I'm not going to do this because that's what my practical brain wants to do. I'm going to do this, and I'm actually going to allow this emotion to be expressed, because we don't do that enough. We tend to distract rather than actually sit in those emotions and feel them. And then when you do that, because we've all been there, right? You have a moment where you feel upset, you cry, and then you will feel better afterwards after having a cry, and that's that in action, isn't it? Or you feel angry, and you kick a ball as hard as you can into the back of a net, or you're running and you just sprint it up a hill and you just get that energy out of you and you feel better for it. Or you let it bottle up and you shout at someone in your car, and you just suddenly, all that anger comes out and you feel lighter for it. That's expressing emotions in action, and it does work. And so that's really what I try and be strict with myself about doing, is understanding how I'm feeling and making sure you actually try and find time to feel it.
And it feels like such a simple thing to say, doesn't it? Like you just mentioned, your counselor saying that, and we've already kind of touched on the education of mental health and surrounding the conversation. You're never told that, are you? Growing up, I was never told feel your feelings, like
Right.
by anyone other than my family. No one that is in a position of power at that point and that you trust um, ever told me that. And I
Mm.
think there is a fundamental problem when that isn't being said at the level of education that is going to influence you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, you're completely right. And I think this is why when we talk to when we talk to anyone, but particularly when we're talking to children, the language we use is really important. And we talk a lot about male mental health. And it's not just how we talk to men, it's how we talk to everyone. But what I remember growing up, a lot of the conversation was, oh, toughen up, like get through this, or don't cry, or oh, you've been so brave not crying. And you're just
Yeah.
like, I know everyone's probably had experience of receiving those sorts of sort of praise for not being upset about something. And yeah, to a certain extent, like we can't all just collapse at every hurdle. And sort of we have to be able to regulate our emotions and sort of allow them to be felt at the right appropriate time. But the idea that it's good to just sort of push things down, it's just completely terrible advice. And you talk to any psychologist that's worth any value, and look at the research, and it is all there to see. If we suppress emotions and we push them away, and we are in a way just moving them and sort of moving them aside, then that's where we get issues like explosive anger, anger management issues. It's where we create problems with relationships. It's where all those problems sort of can come from. So what do we do instead? Let's teach people how to feel. Let's have lessons in school about this. Let's not, pick someone off the floor and go, oh, don't cry. Let's go, that really hurt. That looks like it really hurt. And it's okay if you're feeling upset. It's fine. Have a moment and we'll come back to it. Breathe. Let's get through it. I think it's how we talk to those people from the early days, from like 3 or 4 years old. And it's funny because and again, I can talk about education for hours because it's literally all I spend my days talking about at the moment. But when in schools, I've spoken to so many schools where I've gone, oh, I really think this would be a good thing for you to do. And the school's turned around and gone, oh, we don't think it's appropriate to talk about this until they're about 13. And you're like, hold on a second. Hold on a hot second. I've spoken to clinical psychologists, and for children, and one of the questions I ask all the clinical psychologists, children's clinical psychologists I work for, is what's your youngest client? What's the youngest patient you've dealt with? I've had people say 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, all around that age for the youngest, with self-harming behavior and all of this. The idea that we have to wait until someone's 13 to have a conversation about mental health and self-harm and all these things, rather than think about how an age-appropriate education looks for toddlers and preschool and primary school children. It's a big bit of a bugbear for me, especially when you're hearing that there are 3-year-olds getting clinical support for self-harm. It's like, we can't wait to get 13 to have this conversation. We've got to change how we're really approaching education from the moment someone's born around emotions.
It's almost like, and excuse the analogy, but it's like trying to grow a plant in terrible environments, and then when you realize that it's not quite growing how it should be growing, you move it into the sunshine. It's like, hang on, we need to be doing this from the outset. We need to be delivering that message and delivering the education that people need to be able to flourish right from the start, not trying to fix the problem down the line.
Yeah, I would completely agree. But I think what we've done is we've convinced ourselves that the way we're looking after that plant is the right way to do it.
Yeah.
And for some people, sure, like, let's face it, a lot of us are healthy. We're doing something right at least. But for some people, it is causing issues. And actually, you could argue that there are huge issues that are being caused by this sort of fingers and ears approach to mental health from the early days. So yeah, I completely agree, and it's one that I feel really passionate about. We can't just be talking about mental health as a health issue. It's not just a problem for the NHS to sort out. It's also a problem for the education system to sort out as well. And this is where another frustration comes from me, is that you're constantly being passed between the two, and there's very little communication between Department of Health and Department of Education when it comes to mental health, which is so frustrating. There almost needs to be another department of government for mental health, because it just sort of fits between the two. But it has to be an education priority as well as a health priority.
What was it like? Because your book's out now. If people want to find out more about your book and they want to get your book, please go to Ben's page. All the details will be in the description of this podcast. What was it like, though, putting all these life experiences down on paper? Because traditionally that's a very difficult thing to do. People talk about daily journaling, people talking about keeping a diary, and even that can be quite hard when you've gone through all of these moments and all of these things through your life, and now you have to put it all on paper almost in one go. That must have
Mm.
been a tricky process, a difficult process, a therapeutic process. How did you kind of go about it?
Yeah, it was difficult. It was difficult. To be honest with you, I very quickly forgot that people were going to read it.
Okay.
Very quickly sort of became into a bubble with me and my editor, and I was just sort of typing away, and it got very, very personal very quickly. And I live in a conflict. It's sort of my job is a conflict, because on the one hand, everything I talk about, it's every day I'm talking about the worst thing that ever happened in my life. The worst thing that will ever happen to me. Every day I'm talking about this, and that's a conflict because it's obviously incredibly exhausting to
Yeah.
even think about all of that stuff, let alone talking about it. And yet I want to do that, and I am doing it. And this is a choice. I'm choosing to share this story, and that's a difficult choice. But I'm doing it because I really, really believe that it's so, so important that this story is told. And that's why I wanted to write the book, and that's why I wanted to write it in a really personal way, because the only way that we're going to get governments to introduce policy and take this seriously is if they understand, if people generally understand just how bad it is. And so, particularly when I sort of in the book talk about, in actually quite a large amount of detail, what happened the night that Sam died, that was a really difficult decision, because obviously horrifically difficult for me to type,
Yeah.
but so, so important that suicide isn't just a statistic that is released every year and is actually understood at the human impact of what one of those deaths causes. If we think about 6,000 a year, and just one of those people has impacted me deeply for the rest of my life, my whole family, all of Sam's friends, everyone at Sam's school, everyone at the school that Sam used to go to, all of the paramedics, the air ambulance doctors that were there, the fire service that were there, the police officers that were there. Many of those people messaging me saying they've left the emergency services because it was so bad. I really was passionate about, and I am always passionate about, trying to tell my story as honestly as I possibly can, because it is just so bad, and we
Yeah.
have to do something differently in terms of education, in terms of access to healthcare, and in terms of preventing suicide, because we are on a cliff edge. We are not, everyone says that it's a priority, but I can tell you there's a lot of funding that's being taken out of community mental health and suicide prevention initiatives. So it's really important that we're keeping this conversation and pressure going. It's not a solved issue by any means. They can certainly go one way or another over the next 5 to 10 years. So it's really important that we have these conversations so everyone understands, why are we interested in this? Why is this important?
I think by doing that, it's, it was a decision that you would have had to mull over, right? What sort of detail you were going to go into about that night. And I don't want to say, it's probably the wrong phrasing to say, I feel lucky personally. I made a documentary um, when I was in uni as part of my dissertation on suicide in farming. And I went and I spoke to families that were affected by it. And it's, the statistics are quite shocking because of access and finance. And I could probably talk for at length about it. But I remember sitting down with those families and them telling me the stories about fathers, sons, wives that had taken their lives and been insanely impacted at 18, 19 years old. And I
Mm.
think I can only take that as a personal experience from being in that situation. And I think a lot of people are going to take the same from reading your book and reading the detail and understanding a bit better what happens. And I think, yeah, for you to do that, even though it is a very personal decision and a very personal thing to get into, I think you're gonna change a lot of lives. And I think it's tricky when you're in the position you're in, right? Because I bet you've got people saying things like that to you on a relatively regular basis, saying you're changing people's lives, but you're kind of just going about it, sharing the message, putting your story out there. It must be weird to hear that sometimes.
Yeah, it is. It is weird, and it's oh look. It obviously means a huge amount. It's the reason I wanted to do this is to help people, and it's difficult because I'll be honest. I want to bring back Sam. Like that's what I want to do. Like that's the perfect. And I know that's not possible. So you hear that, and I know for a fact 'cause I've been in the moment with people where you know I've saved people's lives. Like I'm a trained crisis volunteer. Like I've been there in the moment where someone's made the decision to die, and we've managed to stop them from doing that and provide them with support, and that's amazing. And I know that there are a number of people that had I not been there, they wouldn't be alive today, and that's obviously incredibly meaningful, and I love that, and it's like the most incredible feeling in the world. And on a wider level, in an indirect level, I know that these policy decisions and these policy changes and the pressure that we're putting on as a community of people that work in this space is having a knock-on effect and saving lives and reducing suffering, and that's obviously huge. But it is difficult because you sort of look at these people and you see what's happening now, and you see the progress that we're making, and the work that some incredible individuals are doing in this space, and you go, oh, why did it have to be us? Why, it's like why couldn't this have been us that was receiving this treatment or this care or this charity funding or whatever. So it's a really difficult. Obviously, it's a deeply, deeply meaningful to have an impact. And most other times, I would have gone and replied to that question with yes, love it, so good. But to be honest with you, you sort of see that and you go, that's really nice, but oh, what a shame. And that's difficult. And you have to just sort of allow yourself to feel that, because it's completely valid to feel like that. You can feel happy at something you've done, and also just, you know, quite exhausted and annoyed that it hasn't happened sooner. But then again, I sort of direct that back into my work. Teachers
Yeah.
still aren't being educated in mental health. To become a teacher in 2025, you don't have to have any education on child development or mental health, which is just completely bizarre when teachers want the education, and obviously so does to children. So I just direct that emotion back into my work and go, we have to get this done now. And as well as teacher training, there's a lot of other things that I'm involved in that every day that passes is another day that is a missed opportunity to just introduce it and help people and start to solve this issue. So I direct all of that back into the work, and it's not always easy.
And I mean, thinking back to what I just said about making that documentary, right? I was 18. I was 18 when I had that experience. I was 18 when I kind of realized that, you know, there is this in the world and this pain in the world. And I literally, as I was hearing you speak then, I was like, Ben saying exactly, I've kind of answered the question
Mm.
there, right? I've said I was 18. I shouldn't have been 18. I should have been significantly younger than that to understand. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very, very, as you say, complex topic, but what you're doing is amazing. I read your post in January on the anniversary of Sam's passing, and obviously it was incredibly emotional, incredibly heartfelt. And then at the end of that, you kind of announced your the next thing that you're going to be doing to raise money. We'll get into who you're raising money for in a second,
Yeah.
but the video then you followed it up with, I think a few days later, was the most relatable video, I think, to a lot of runners and a lot of people that have done sport or challenges, because you said, I put it out there now, I have to do it. You're
Yeah.
like, right,
Yeah,
okay, here we
exactly.
go. So kind of get into a little bit about who you're raising money for and exactly what you're going to be doing in May.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've said already in the podcast, I've always liked running. Like it's always been something that I've enjoyed. It's always been a nice way of escaping things for me, and it's been a lifeline actually in a lot of the stuff I've gone through. I've always been interested in running an ultra marathon. I've always my whole life I've been fascinated with endurance and human endurance, and read some amazing books about human endurance. It's just always fascinated me that the human body can do something like that. So I've decided in May to run my first ultramarathon, which I'll be honest with you is in 8 weeks. So it's like it suddenly feels a bit real, which is fine. I'm a half of me is looking forward to it, and half of me is sort of quite nervous. But I'm running the Ultra Scotland 50k in May, which will be just beautiful and amazing. I don't know how long it's going to be beautiful and amazing for, but
Yeah.
we'll see. The start will be beautiful and amazing. And I'm running it for Shout. So Shout is the national crisis text line in the UK. It was started about 4-5 years ago. It's a text-based support service. It's so anyone in the UK can text Shout for free and receive text-based support. So a bit like how Samaritans works, where you phone them up and you can talk to a volunteer on the phone. Shout works on text, and what it means is it's a lot more accessible for young people. So we see a lot of young people texting the service. I want to raise money for them because they need funding, so that the service can exist. But actually, beyond that, my goal with this is to recruit volunteers. I'm a volunteer myself. I've been a volunteer for about 3 years on the platform. And really, they are the beating heart of this charity. Normal, ordinary people volunteering a couple hours of their week to the service is an incredible thing to be a part of. And I know there are so many people out there that would make absolutely incredible volunteers, because essentially you don't need any qualifications. You don't need you don't need any training that you've already done. If as long as you have the empathy and you want to help someone, Shout will give you some world-leading training, and you're given a clinical supervisor whenever you log in to do a shift, and essentially you are there for people in sometimes the worst moment of their life. I've saved lives on the Shout platform. I've been there for people in some really, really awful moments, and almost every single time we make a huge difference to that person's day, and in some cases that person's entire life. And I really, really want to find those people out there that would make brilliant volunteers and get them to join our lovely team of people that are helping anyone in the UK that texts us. So that's the plan.
That's the plan, man. You're gonna smash it. I've got no doubt. I love the way you said I don't know how beautiful it's going to be, for how long it's going to be beautiful for. Like, it'll be beautiful for probably 54 or 55k, because they always lie. They're always
Yeah.
they're always a little bit longer than they say they're going to be. I think that's a, yeah, I know. I just
Yeah.
put the fear in you. You're like, I want them to be 4 or 5k shorter. That would be the best.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So because I worked with a coach, and one of the first questions was like, oh, so why did you choose this run? And I was like, well, actually, to be fair, like running to me is not about distance. It's sort
Yeah.
of about where you go. Like I've always just loved putting on a pair of shoes and just going with not really a plan of where I'm going, just to enjoy being outside and exploring. So being in Scotland, like running along Loch Ness, that'll be amazing, and it will help, I think, distract you from the time and the distance. But yeah, I'm not sure. And also Scotland can be a little bit of a unpredictable
No, let's not mention
weather-wise.
the weather. Let's not
In my
mention the weather.
in my head, it's going to be like it is today, blue sky, nice and about 10 degrees, light
Yeah.
breeze, beautiful. It's not really, is it? It's going to be.
No, it's gonna. No, it's gonna be positive mental attitude. It's gonna be
Yeah, no,
100%.
you're right, exactly. But that's the plan, and I'm really looking forward to it. And it'll be really, really nice to be able to finish that on a personal point as well. Like, having always been really interested in this, and I mean, I actually, what started this for me was reading Born to Run by
Yeah.
Christopher McDougall, that
You're
brilliant book.
literally my iMac is. I can see that book. It's like
Can you?
balancing on it. Yeah,
I
it's an
recommend it to
unbelievable
everyone
book.
as well. Like, I think my book's done about 6 different people now.
Yeah.
Brilliant book, absolutely brilliant book. And you can't read that and not go, I want to see what I can do. Like, if we're literally designed from the toes to the scalp, being able to do this, then I'd love to be able to see what that's actually like. So I'm excited. I am genuinely excited, and the training's been great. Like, I've really really enjoyed the training, and really enjoyed just like getting out, because also as someone that was literally just running for fun, you'd see it was raining outside, and you'd be like, well, I'm not going for a run today then. And when I have a training schedule, you have to be like, yeah, no, I am. I've got to go out. And actually, those are the runs that you feel really proud of yourself for doing, because you, every moment of tying up your laces, you were like, oh, can I find a way out of this? Can I do something else? And you feel good about those ones. So yeah, I've enjoyed it so far. So good.
I think it's a couple of things, isn't it? And you mentioned, you love just getting outside, and I've seen on your Instagram, spending time in Snowdonia and the Welsh mountains and all over the place, really. And I think we talk about it so much, but it offers that perspective, doesn't it? Sometimes when you're in those environments, you've just been to Japan skiing as well. I'm sure out there, it's perspective. It's the size. It's how kind of small you feel in that moment, but not small in a bad way or a negative way. Small in a, you know, sometimes knowing that you're a smaller cog in a bigger plan is quite a powerful feeling.
Mm.
I don't know
So
what
this
that
is
is.
really interesting, because the day after Sam died, I we had police around. It wasn't a nice place to be, and I just took my dog out for a walk, and I just walked. I had no idea where I was going. I just walked, must like probably hours, and I literally just found myself under a tree in this field with just this incredible view on the top of a hill. And I was the only person there. And obviously, this awful thing has just happened to my life. Like, my entire world has just collapsed and fallen to pieces around me. I had no idea what was going to happen. I had no idea what I was doing. It was just complete vertigo and confusion. And I remember like just looking out, and you've got cars just driving along the road. A plane came over my head, like a passenger plane just like flew over through the sky. And you just sat there, and I was like, nothing's changed.
Mm.
Nothing else. Like, this awful thing has just destroyed my life. But actually, everything's still going. Nothing's actually changed in the grand scheme of things. And that can feel quite overwhelming. But for me, it just felt really settling. I just felt quite settled in that moment of going, you know what? Nothing else has changed. And I'm still here, and my heart's still beating. I feel obviously horrific and upset, but it does put stuff into perspective. And I think that's why I love it so much, like the hills of Wales. I mean, regardless of the weather, you go for a walk and you climb a hill in Wales and you get to the top. You can't, I don't think it's possible to feel bad. You don't do that and feel worse than when you felt at the bottom. And also, it's just such a great way of getting out with people as well. So I do, like, with my friends, or when we were in Japan with my brother and my family. Like, it's just perspective, and also just amazing ways to connect with people whilst doing something. And actually with running as well, so much of that's perspective. Like, that's
Yeah,
why I absolutely, and I'm sure a lot of people on here agree, I absolutely hate a treadmill.
yeah.
They're the worst things that have ever been invented. And look, you can't get around using them. I had to use them for training, but just, it's not running for me. It's not what I consider running, because running for me is exploring, finding somewhere new. It's like going along a track that you've not seen before. It's why, like, I wanted a trail ultra marathon, because that for me is like the epitome of what running is. It's exploring. It's going uphill, or finding a route, and finding somewhere new. So and it's all about perspective, and that rhythm you get into, it's just so settling. Like, it's you just quieten your thoughts. So I can't understand anyone that runs with music on, because I it, I just absolutely bathe in that rhythm. It's like meditation. It's just
Yeah.
unbelievably settling. My brain is completely silent when I'm running, and it's just so lovely. And I haven't ever felt anything really like that, where you can just plod along for hours and just have a really quiet head. And it's really, really nice.
I think something it gives you as well, particularly in kind of the ultra distance, and I think you see this in Born to Run, and you see it, by listening to ultra athletes or reading about ultra athletes and the feats they've reached, the distances they've run. They all say it's all mental, like,
Yeah.
or it's 90% mental. And I think thinking about that, what the brain can do in a positive way, I think it allows you to understand what the brain can also do in a negative way, like how strong the brain is in that way of the pendulum. can
Mm.
also be how strong the brain is in the other way of the pendulum. And I think by doing difficult things positively, it allows you to understand that other side a little bit.
Yeah. And one of the best things I've ever learned, and this isn't just from running, but sort of life in generally, is the brain lies. It lies a lot. Um, and we don't get taught that either. I think that's a really important lesson to learn. What the brain is telling you is not always 100% true. I think a great example of this is the viral dress. Can't remember when it was from. Was it
Yeah,
2019? The blue and black dress.
it always pops up, doesn't it,
Some
occasionally?
people saw blue and black dress. Some people saw white and gold dress. For the people that saw blue and black dress, you were convinced the dress was blue and black. For people that saw it as white and gold, you were convinced it was white and gold. It can't be both. So someone's brain's lying, and it's so true. And like when you go through difficult experiences, it can feel like something's not possible, or it can feel like, we've probably all been there with running, where you just don't feel like you can finish a session or tempo. You can't keep that pace for much longer, and you can find something there, and that's all mental, because the brain's lying. Your muscles can, and this is why Born to Run was such a brilliant book, because it was all about that, wasn't it? It was about,
Yeah,
well, a lot of it was about actually, your brain will give up far, far, far longer than your body will. But you won't think that. You'll think it's
yeah,
the other way around. And the same is true with mental health. Um, with anxiety, for example, when we're dealing with a lot of anxiety issues that people have, and the anxiety that I've had in the past, it's not been true what I'm saying or thinking. When you're anxious about what people are thinking about you, it's not true. You don't know that's happening. It's your brain lying to you. It's lying to you to keep you safe, because that's its ultimate job, is your brain is there to keep you safe. But it's lying. And I think as soon as you really understand to just take thoughts with a pinch of salt, and be a little bit more critical about the thoughts that you're having, and have a little bit more trust in everything else, and sort of see your brain as a sort of autopilot in a plane, where it can say one thing, but actually as an executive decision maker, I can go, that's not quite right, and put it back on course. The brain is an amazing tool, but sometimes it tries to convince you about things that aren't true. I think that's a really, really important lesson that I learned, is to go, I appreciate what you're trying to tell me. This is me talking to my brain. I appreciate what you're trying to tell me. I don't think that's completely true. This is what we're going to do. And so it's not attacking your brain, going, why are you lying to me? Blah, blah, blah. It's going, I appreciate the job you're trying to do. Appreciate why you're trying to tell me this. But actually, this is what we're going to do. I know we can do this. Um, it's a really important lesson that I think, one of the most important lessons I've learned. And also from my point of view, so it's something that I find where endurance is so interesting. So when you look at the studies about the marathon times, and it was a US Yale study that looked
yeah,
at 9 million marathon times, and you've got these massive peaks around the 3 hour mark, 4 hour mark, 5 hour mark, and you're going, if it's our body, the limitation of our body, these peaks wouldn't be there. It's all brain. Because if
yeah,
people can speed up in the last mile and a half of a marathon, that's not because their body's given up and can't go faster. It's because their brain set that limitation. And some of these studies are so fascinating about how the brain interacts with endurance, and physical endurance, but also mental endurance, and sets those limitations on ourselves. I find endurance absolutely fascinating from a psychological point of view, not just in terms of sport, but in terms of how that actually interacts with all sort of things in life. Because there were so many moments where, when I was going through grief and trauma, where my brain was telling me stuff that was just horrifically unhelpful and dark and awful. This is your fault, blah blah blah. All of these things that just aren't true. But I was sort of creating these fixed beliefs about things, that were just really, really horrible, and I believed them at the time, and it really impacted me, and did for a number of years, until someone else can sort of provide that treatment. You can start understanding your thoughts and being a little bit more critical about the thoughts that you sort of believe and don't. But anyway, that's a long ramble about something very simple, which is the brain lies. It's not this god that
yeah.
lives in your head. It's flawed in its own ways.
And mate, it's not a ramble at all, because even when you said in there, you're almost having a conversation with your own brain, aren't you? Well, that shows how complex it is,
Yeah.
because your brain's having a conversation with your own brain, and then you're aware that your brain's having this and you're like, whoa, hang on, this is like very Inception, and like I can't quite deal with it. But it's so true. Like, people often talk about the angel and the devil on your shoulder, but I think there's an angel and a devil, and then I think if you put your hands out, there's a couple of other people sitting on there as well, and it's just,
Yeah.
you've got so many layers in your brain to kind
Oh
of
yeah.
deal with. It's
And
brutal.
what I've tried, yeah, and what I've tried to do as well, and coming back to the running is because one of the best things we can do for mental endurance is to build proof that something's not true. So when we're talking about the brain not being true, actually the best way of showing that is by having past proof. So sort of, I spend a lot of time writing down examples of when I felt like that's it and I've kept going, because that's, you're creating proof there. So you actually to spend a half an hour just going through and thinking about your entire life and go, this is when I thought I was done, but actually had more to give. And you can start understanding that that's possible. And then with running, like what I try and add into my sessions is, let's really push. And then at the end, you've just got to go further. So you've basically got to go as hard as you can and obviously not get close to injury, and then try and get that little bit extra at the end, and then write that back in that book. Going, I tell you what, I was completely done. Like my lungs were on fire. I really thought that hill was never going to stop. I still got to the top, and if I hadn't forced myself to do it, I would not have kept going. And there we go. You're building that mental bank of knowledge that actually, when times get tough and my brain says that's enough, I know I've got that evidence that says I can keep going. And that's one thing that I have taken away from all the reading of studies and things that I try and do, because again, it doesn't just help with running, it helps with life, because your brain's going to tell you that that's it a lot and you have nothing else to give. And if we have that bank of information that goes, that's not quite true, then that's how, from my point of view, in terms of what I've read, that's how endurance can really start to improve.
And people talk about the endurance CV, right? The things you've done to be able to say,
Mm.
I can do this next thing. I often think, and speaking to just friends and people I know in the space, um, people often think that's only to do with medals. Like, what's your endurance CV? Well, I've done this race and this race and this race. Whoa, like, no, you're going out every morning. You went out on Monday when it was hammering it down, and you really didn't want to go. That proves more to me than that medal that you've got, because there's something at the end of that. There's that external gratification of the Instagram post. There's nothing when you're getting up in the morning and you've got to just go and grind it out. So I
Yeah.
think that's what that sort of term endurance CV means to me anyway.
Yeah. And not even just running related things,
Yeah, 100%.
But the big feature in mine is this, all those feelings that I associated with grief and trauma. There was many moments that my brain was like, not sure how I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
I'm here. Like we got through it, and I'm healthy and happy. And I was many moments where my brain told me that was never going to happen again. Happiness, I've done it. And so it's just this whole. I think everyone should. You mentioned about earlier about the book and what that was like, and it must have been therapeutic, and it was, because suddenly you've got all these thoughts on paper, and I think everyone should, in their own way, write a book, and not write it for anyone to read, just for your own self to get it onto paper. A lot of people love journaling. There's so much evidence and studies that support journaling being good for your mental health. And essentially, what we're describing here is an element of journaling. It's creating proof and being analytical about our thoughts. So I would encourage everyone to do that, and to have a think about writing stuff down, keeping a bit of a mood diary, not just considering how physically you feel after a session, but actually, like, what's your brain doing? What are you thinking? Like, map out some of the thoughts you're having. What's going on? Did you think, how did you perceive certain sessions and all of that? I'm saying that like I'm an expert. I'm very, very new to all of this,
No, but it's
but I'm not
yeah.
new to mental struggle and getting through the mental barriers of some really difficult things. And that's also why I'm a little bit fascinated about how it's going to go in May, because
Yeah.
I'd consider myself to be like pretty mentally tough, and that doesn't necessarily mean not emotional. I'm an incredibly emotional person, but I'd consider myself mentally tough. And so it's been really interesting to see when you hit that wall in by a long way, the longest distance I've ever run, like how I'm going to get across that. And I don't really know what the answer to that is. I've never pushed myself physically that hard. So I'm really excited to sort of see where my brain goes and how I get myself back out of that moment, and how that compares to some of the other things I've done.
The exciting thing is finding out, though, mate. The exciting thing is finding out, which is
100%.
just so exciting. I'm so excited for you, and I think as well with the journaling thing and what we've just been talking about, we forget so easily. Like we forget, and if we don't remind ourselves some of the things that we've done, like you say, in your sporting life, in your personal life, in your work life, your financial life, all of these different things and facets that make you up. If you don't remind yourself of the things you've done, you forget. And I think then again, the brain comes into play, right? You've forgotten, and that's when those feelings of negativity come in because you don't think you've done it, and you're like, and it's all that spiraling situation then. So it's reminding yourself, isn't it, that you are incredible and you have done these things, and whatever that is in life.
When your brain tells you, or you're not going to do this, or this person's saying this about you, or you're not good enough to do this, be rigid, reject it. No, that's not true. Calm down. I'm okay.
Yeah.
Look at all the evidence we've got. Easier said than done. And that's also not, just to reiterate, I don't want to come across like that saying reject those negative feelings, because like I said at the beginning, like the only way you process sadness is by being sad. Like resilience isn't just ignoring emotions. We can do both. We can be good at endurance mentally and physically, and also actually understand the right moment to feel things and be emotional, and cry and be angry at things and people, and do that in a healthy way. There's two exist, and only two have to exist for good mental health.
We'll finish with this, man, because I've loved this conversation, and thank you so much for your time. Does all of this and everything you've done over the past 7 years, does it make you feel closer to Sam?
Yeah, definitely. So out of the two of us, Sam was the first one to do this job. He was desperate for people to think about mental health a little bit differently. He used to put up, I didn't know this at the time, but he would go around school putting up posters after school about depression, anxiety, with information on them, because he was so desperate for people to just know a little bit more about how he was feeling. So he was the first one of us to do it. And if I wasn't sitting here, I'm not sure Sam would have ever run an ultramarathon, but if I wasn't sitting here, I'm sure he would be doing this, and having these conversations on these sorts of podcasts, and pushing for better support.